All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Manuel Toledo Hernandez. I am from Westlake University. And for me, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this symposium from the ATBC that is entitled The Role of Agroforestry Systems in the Decade of UN Ecosystem Restorations. As you may know, agroforestry systems, they are playing a more important role, and it's been discussed publicly more and more, because there are systems that they could balance between crop productivity, but also preservation of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Also, something very exciting about agroforestry systems is that they have a high diversity of linking between topics from social science to ecology, economics, which makes it very, very exciting and interesting to work also in collaboration. So to try to show this diversity of topics of agroforestry systems, we did an effort to invite great speakers that we have for today, that they cover different topics on agroforestry systems, from cocoa and coffee and rubber, coming from Colombia and Mexico to Ghana and Cameroon, as well as Thailand and Indonesia. And also we have tried to cover as well different levels of academic seniority, from PhD candidates to professors, to have more a diversity of discussion. So I would like to introduce you to the speakers of today. So we have Carolina Ocampo-Ariza from Göttingen University in Germany. We have as well Eleanor Warren Thomas from Bangor University in the UK, as well as Alejandra Jaramillo from Universidad Militar Nueva Granada in Bogotá, Colombia, and Thomas Vanga from Westlake University in China. Before starting the talks, I just would like to remind you that any questions and that you may have, please don't hesitate to make them across the talks by using the box that is at the bottom here in the Zoom link, and we will try to answer them while we are on the talks. And at the end of the talks, we will have time for questions and answers. Please also don't forget to write the name of the speaker if you are directing one question to one of the speakers directly, so that afterwards it's easy for us to allocate the questions. All right, so after this introduction, I think we are ready to start the talk. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's get started.
Hello, my name is Thomas Vanga. I'm the initiator and core team chair of the Global Agroforestry Network Initiative. And while I'm giving this presentation here today, I would like to fully acknowledge all the contributors and all the individuals that make this wonderful network possible. So I want to introduce you to the Global Agroforestry Network Initiative and all the opportunities that it provides for cocoa, coffee, and rubber agroforestry research. The United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is an important initiative by the United Nations Environmental Programme and the Food and Agriculture Organization. It is aiming to restore the planet's degraded aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. So for instance, if by 2030 we would be able to restore 350 million hectares of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, that could remove about 13 to 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, and it could also generate about $9 trillion in return of ecosystem services. The United Nations has also specified 8 key target areas for restoration, and one of them is farmlands. So we want to focus more on agroforestry systems within these farmlands for key targets for restoration. Agroforests, so that means the deliberate inclusion of trees into farming systems of, for example, cocoa, coffee, and rubber, have been shown to provide various benefits. So for example, carbon sequestration potential of agroforestry systems is enhanced as opposed to monocultures. We've also seen significant biodiversity benefits of agroforestry systems compared to monocultures, which then also translates into ecosystem service benefits. So for example, biological pest control potential is higher. We see benefits in terms of pollination in agroforestry systems. But we also see that agroforestry systems oftentimes provide diversified incomes for smallholder farmers, and therefore an insurance mechanism against global commodity price volatilities. While we know a fair big deal about agroforestry systems, important research gaps prevail. And one of the key research gaps, I would say, is that we still need to integrate better all the knowledge that we have from different continents, and then try to understand this global variability that we see in the benefits and also the disadvantages of agroforestry systems. The Global Agroforestry Network Initiative is trying to do exactly that, to understand that global variability of effects that have been shown in different parts of the world. So we are a multi-stakeholder research platform that is looking into important questions for cocoa, coffee, and rubber agroforestry systems. So we've been very fortunate to have some of the leading researchers of agroforestry systems on our team. And what I would like to do next is to introduce you to 3 projects that we have been able to start already. Our first project is looking at pollination of cocoa globally and the effects on the environment and smallholders. Previous research has shown that cocoa is pollination limited and that manual pollination can actually increase crop yields by 160%. So that's important for the transition from cocoa monocultures to agroforestry systems to compensate for potential yield gaps. But it is also interesting for smallholder farmers because of the income benefits. We're looking at this work in sites in Brazil, in Cameroon, Ghana, and Indonesia, and we're employing new monitoring technologies to get high resolution information on these pollinators. So hopefully this will yield new information on pollinator ecology, but also in how we can manage agroforestry systems to maintain pollinators in these systems and enhance the benefits for human well-being. We've done quite a bit of outreach to communicate these results to the public, and we've also talked and engaged with the industry about this work. The project is coordinated by Dr. Manuel Toledo Hernandez, and you will hear more about this in, I think, the next talk. Our second project is about rubber agroforestry and the benefits that these systems can provide for the environment, socially, but also in economic terms. Rubber is primarily produced in monocultures in Southeast Asia, and up to date, a synthesis report on the benefits of rubber agroforestry compared to monocultures was not available. So we set out to provide this first rubber agroforestry report and discuss feasibilities at scale and look into the barriers that need to be overcome, for example, for smallholder farmers and the industry. We've also done quite a bit of outreach activity and talked to industry associations to facilitate uptake of that work, and we will of course continue to do so. This work is led by Eleanor Warren Thomas, and you will hear more about that as well in a subsequent talk. The third project I would like to introduce to you is on the global restoration potential of cocoa and coffee agroforestry. What we're doing here is building a database of cocoa and coffee agroforestry systems globally, so in Latin America, in Africa, and also in Asia, and then using these sites in a machine learning and spatially explicit forecasting approach together with Tom Crowther's lab at ETH Zurich to determine the potential of these agroforestry systems for global ecosystem restoration potential. Now, in the past, such approaches have been trialed, But the problem has always been the great similarity between forests and agroforestry systems. While we can certainly not exclude that this will also be a problem in this approach, we're just trying to overcome or tackle that problem with a very large training data set. So we're trying to maximize the number of sites that we can use in this machine learning approach to do the forecasting. So this project is coordinated by myself, but of course it's built on collaborations with many people, and we're very happy to invite collaborations to make that happen. So if you have sites available, please do get in touch. The Global Agroforestry Network is in essence a collaborative endeavor where we're trying to advance the knowledge of agroforestry systems in cocoa, coffee, and rubber. So if you work on agroforestry systems in any of these three commodities, it would be fantastic if you can consider collaborating with us. I already mentioned one avenue that we could collaborate with the Global Agroforestry Network, and that is if you have a map of your agroforestry sites available and you would be keen to share that with us, that would be immensely helpful for the cocoa and coffee mapping approach that I introduced in the previous slide. And of course, that would then facilitate the co-authorship on the global mapping publications that result from that initiative. Another avenue could be to help define cocoa and coffee agroforestry systems. This is also something that I have not mentioned, but that's something we're very interested in. And in general, if you have project ideas that you think are important to do in rubber, cocoa, or coffee agroforestry systems, it would be fantastic, not just for me, but all the colleagues in the GAN to hear from you, and potentially we can then work something out. I would like to thank you for listening to the talk, and also I would like to thank the collaborators that have made the Global Agroforestry Network possible and pushed it to where we are now. If you want, please do feel free to get in touch, check out our website, and enjoy the upcoming talks.
Welcome, everybody. In this talk, I'm going to focus on the importance of agroforestry systems for the conservation of pollinators and pollination services. And I will tell you some examples of ecological and technological innovations that the Global Agroforestry Network has been developing in the past years in regions where we are working. First, I would like to share with you the region where we start our cocoa pollination research, which was in Central Sulawesi, Indonesia. This region is important because it's the main producer of cocoa in the country. When working here, we had the opportunity to talk with local authorities, with farmers and students, and became aware of the problematics when producing cocoa. Farmers are currently facing yield declines, which are associated to the law of resilience of the systems, since they are moving from agroforestry systems to monocultures to increase yields. We believe that a way to motivate farmers to keep agroforestry systems is by investigating them and finding ways to increase yields with ecological intensification practices such as pollination services. The research in Indonesia started with three main questions. The first one was that we wanted to understand what is the role of forests and agroforests for the conservation of pollinators in general. To address the following question, we look at the habitats that are important for pollinators. Based on scientific evidence, it is known that the cocoa pollinators, they will reproduce in habitats that are dark and also have high humidity. So we will assume that agroforests and forest areas, they could provide those habitats. So to test this hypothesis, we work in 24 farms that we characterize. At the landscape level, we look at the complex habitats. This is understood as the percentage of forest and agroforest that is surrounding the cocoa farms. At the farm level, we look at the percentage of canopy cover, which is provided by the shade trees, and also at the amount of leaf litter that is provided by the shade trees in combination with the cacao trees. And at the tree level, we account for the number of flowers that are produced by the trees that we were sampling. Coming to the results, what you can see here are the 4 variables that I previously introduced to you, and we observe that the abundance of the main cocoa pollinators that we collected, which are flies and ants, they were positively correlated with the 4 variables. This tells us that indeed, for preserving the potential pollinators in the agroforestry systems, it's very important to preserve forests and agroforests as they are providing the important requirements for the pollinators to reproduce. The second question that we addressed was if enhancing pollination will be an alternative for increasing yields in agroforestry systems. Here we developed 2 different experiments where we hand pollinate cocoa flowers in the trees. The first experiment, we hand pollinate flowers below 2 meters high at different rates, from 0% that represent not pollination or natural pollination to 100% that represent the hand pollination of all flowers below 2 meters high. We also look at 3 yield-related variables, which are fruit set, harvested fruits, and yield. And we found that yields increase for all yield-related variables. For instance, fruit set increased by 700%, harvested fruits increased by 86%, and yields increased by 51%. Furthermore, in experiment 2, we hand pollinate all flowers in a tree in order to understand what will be the complete benefit of hand pollination in an entire tree. For this, we select a different cocoa farms and different trees where we hand pollinate all flowers. And we compare hand pollinated trees with non-natural pollinated trees. And our results show that the yield increased by 160% in those trees that were hand pollinated. And not only that, but the farmers that they participate in this study, they saw a farmer income increase of 68%. And this was already after accounting for the labor used for hand pollination, as well for other farm operational costs that are necessary for running the farm. After finding those results, we came to the last question, which is, what is the way forward for pollination research after knowing that agroforestry systems are important in Indonesia as well as forests, and also that hand pollination could increase yields? The Global Cocoa Pollination Project has at the moment 3 different sub-projects. The first one is that we are developing AIE cameras to monitor pollinators on real time. This sub-project is being led by Kevin Darras from Wesley University. He, together with other colleagues, is developing machine learning software that train the AIE algorithm to detect insects when they land on flowers. So you simply place the camera in front of flowers, and once an insect is landing on the flower, the algorithm will detect them and will just shoot a picture of it. Here you can see different prototypes that we have developed. The most recent one is the one that you see at the bottom right. The first trials are already taking place right now in the Cabruca systems, in the Agroforestry Systems of Brazil. And later on, we are planning to deploy these cameras in other regions where we are working. Second, we want to reveal the identity of the pollinators by using metabarcoding techniques. In this sub-project, which is led by a PhD student from Durham University, Alma Sanchez-Quiñones, she is developing a methodology to trace the DNA from insects that they are landing on cocoa flowers. Once she's extracting this DNA this insect DNA from the flowers, she's amplifying it and is able to identify the insects at the species level. Once this methodology is being developed by her, we plan to deploy also those metabarcoding techniques in other areas where we are collecting insects and flower samples. Finally, we are improving the hand pollination tools that we have developed in the past, and we are also training producers to use hand pollination techniques. Currently, we have 2 projects, one in Ghana and another one in Brazil. And we have seen that in both projects, the yields are increasing considerably. For instance, in the agroforestries of Ghana, yields are increasing by double. And in the Cabruca systems of Brazil, yields are increasing even 10 times. This tells us that hand pollination is a potential technique that could increase yields in agroforestry systems. And here I would like to conclude my talk, not without missing the opportunity to invite you to participate and contribute with us in the Global Pollination Project. If you have any questions and ideas, please contact me in the following sources. Thank you very much.
Hi, welcome to my talk. My name is Carolina Ocampo, and today I'll tell you a bit about the opportunities for social and biological diversity offered by Cacao Agroforestry Systems. So cacao production has a bittersweet side that is well known. At the farm level, there are issues with deforestation, biodiversity loss, and as a consequence, an increase in pests and diseases. For producers, there are unfair payments for labor. There is poor inclusion of women and young generations, and there are issues with the infrastructure that farmers have for processing cacao once it is harvested. And then at the market level, there is also a very large demand which is hard to meet. There is a poor access to the market for farmers, and there are ever-growing international standards that are hard to meet. But we want to do it right, no? So both from academia, from science, and from practice, we are trying to find solutions to all of these issues. So here I have just some examples of papers that have explored solutions of how to combine better agroforestry management strategies and landscape characteristics with biodiversity maintenance, and also on how to identify the main needs of producers and buyers and to address them in the best way. And there are both strategies and initiatives from local countries and also from private companies to address this. So I have here, for example, the German Initiative on Sustainable Cocoa. There are also worldwide initiatives for this, and there are also private companies that have created their own labels as this Cocoa Life. And what we have learned from all these proposals is that a solution must be global. It must tackle several issues at the same time. So it must be science-based, it must be addressed at a large scale, and it must include multiple stakeholders. And this is what Garibaldi and collaborators proposed in 2019, that we include multiple levels of biodiversity and all the possible stakeholders to solve at the same time social, economic, and biodiversity issues. And this is what we try to do in our project. We are studying mostly native cacao agroforestry and how it can be used as a sustainable alternative for diversity. And we have been doing this in Peru because it holds a large diversity of everything. So there is a large cacao diversity. It is the center of origin and the center of diversification of cacao. 75% of the cacao that Peru exports is considered fine in flavor, so it has very high quality standards. It is also a very biodiverse country. It holds one of the largest bird diversities in the world, and cacao is grown in different ecosystems, not only in rainforests. And also the smallholders are very diverse in terms of age, whether they are associated or not, the management strategies that they use in their plantations, and the fact that young generations are very interested in creating business related to cacao. So our project diversifies native fine and flavor cacao production to enhance productivity and income, and we do it studying the three aspects that I have mentioned so far. So at the farm level, we study biodiversity. Today I will tell you a bit about my doctoral thesis project, which focuses on flying vertebrates and pest control ecosystem services. We have also been tackling topics of inclusion at the producer level, which I will mention, how to include more women in the production chain, and how to meet the diversity of cacao and producers with the buyers. So how to connect either independent producers or cooperatives as Norandino with the needs of buyers. And here are the main methods that we use to study biological and social diversity. We selected two study regions that were very contrasting. On one hand, we have the tropical dry forests in Piura, which are very seasonal, very dry. Cacao needs irrigation in these places. And on the other hand, we have Cusco, which has one of the largest cacao diversities. It is part of the center of diversification of cacao, and it is dominated by subtropical forests. And so we studied birds and bats with point counts in the case of birds and misnetting service in the case of bats, and we analyzed how bird and bat diversity changed with the position of the forests, so the distance between the agroforests and the forest, and with seasonality. And we compared these patterns for the birds between the two landscapes, so between the dry tropical forest and the subtropical forest. And for the social diversity, we performed a series of surveys, and we created 9 focal groups of women and young cacao producers to identify what their main challenges are. And then we also contacted over 75 fine and flavor cacao buyers of different nationalities and tried to understand what their needs were in terms of cacao flavors, cacao amounts, and cacao processing. What are the main results that we have found so far? So, first of all, in tropical dry forests, we found that the presence of birds changed with season. So the birds benefited from cacao mostly in the dry season. We found that bird abundance increased with distance to forest in the dry season, which is when the resources are most scarce in the forest. But on the other hand, we found that bats benefit from cacao permanently. So we found in both seasons that the species richness of bats increased in cacao agroforests that were far from the forests. And moreover, the number of insectivorous bats also increased in those forests, in those agroforests. And this gives a very important message for the value of cacao agroforestry for flying vertebrates, and it also gives a very positive message about the availability of pest control ecosystem services in cacao. If we have more insectivorous bats, there is likely a better control of these pests. But we also found that these patterns were unique to the tropical dry forest, so we also performed the bird studies in the subtropical forests of Cusco and found there completely different patterns. So we found that bird species richness didn't change that much, and the functional traits of the birds changed a lot. And what this means is that conservation management strategies for cacao must be developed according to the local traits of the biological communities and to the specific ecosystem and landscape that you are studying. And from our conversations with farmers, we identified 3 main issues. So the first issue is related to gender. 25% of the producers in Peru are women, but they are mostly regarded as having only a supportive or domestic role in cacao production. And this keeps a very large knowledge untapped. Women hold traditional knowledge of how to process cacao, especially parts of cacao that are not typically used, as the cacao pulp. So the project has been trying to include women more and train them in cacao processing. We also found an issue with age, and is that groups of different ages have very divergent priorities, and this is related to their access to secondary education. So younger generations are more worried about improving in the business, whereas older generations are more worried about keeping their independence as producers. And this means that there is probably a poor generational replacement, as younger generations don't necessarily want to be involved in the cacao agroforestry process. The third topic is cacao genetics. So the large diversity of cacao in Peru is not explored enough. We don't know the clear flavor profiles of the native varieties, and then it's hard to connect the diversity that producers have in their farm with the needs of the market. But the good thing is that these issues can be tackled simultaneously in a way, so younger generations can be trained for other stages of cacao, and then their additional training can be used to maximize sustainability of the business. So the idea is that after our conversations with buyers, we identified that they require very specific flavor profiles. And once those profiles are identified, we can create long-term relationships between buyers and farmers. And these long-term relationships are very positive because they ensure a stable and long-lasting income for the farmers, then they can use more of the resources to improve independent cacao processing and nature conservation. We have examples here in the figure. Farmers have been able to create processing plants and also create restoration projects using this additional money. So the take-home messages are: cacao agroforests can offer multiple alternatives for diversification. There are challenges but also opportunities for pairing forest conservation and sustainable cacao. We need the skills of women and younger generations, and especially the reality is diverse. We need to improve social and biological diversity, taking into account the local conditions of each place. That is it for now. Thank you for watching. We have many people to thank: the farmers, our field assistants, our students, and I invite you to also visit the poster by Justine Van Singel, which focuses on cacao pollination services in Peru. Thank you, and I look forward to our question and answer session.
Hello, I'm Eleanor Warren-Thomas from Bangor University in the UK. Thanks for coming to listen to my talk on rubber agroforestry practices, opportunities to support ecosystem restoration and livelihoods. This work was jointly created by me, Maria and Tom as part of the Global Agroforestry Network. So why are we focused on natural rubber? So many of you already know rubber is a tropically grown crop, and demand for it is continuing to increase. Rubber yields have pretty much plateaued, so that means the continued rising demand for natural rubber, which is used to make vehicle tires, condoms, medical gloves, and things like that, is met by increasing the area of planted rubber plantations rather than yield increases currently. And you can see that rubber plantations are mostly concentrated in Southeast Asia. There are increasing areas being planted in West Africa as well. Now, rubber is mostly grown by smallholders in Indonesia and Thailand, and increasingly in Southwest China. And rubber monocultures have delivered enormous livelihood benefits for those people, but this has come at a cost. We know that converting forest to rubber reduces biodiversity, species richness of birds, bats, and beetles, shown on the plot here. We know that deforestation to plant rubber plantations results in carbon emissions. We know that long-term monocultural cultivation depletes soil nutrients, as shown on the bottom right. That's from a 30-year study in Southwest China. We also know that monocultures are vulnerable to climate risks. So things like droughts, frosts, and typhoons. If you have a monocultural system, we have an understanding that they are more likely to be damaged through these risks relative to diversified systems. And we also know that rubber, a strong dependence on rubber in a monoculture can expose smallholders to fluctuations in rubber price. So these data shown on the table on the bottom left are from Hainan, from Sichuan Banan, showing a decline in rubber income from 2013 to 2015 due to reductions in global rubber prices. So our remit with this work was to conduct a really thorough review of the literature to understand whether agroforestry practices in rubber cultivation could generate benefits for livelihoods, but also for biodiversity and the wider environment. And I'll frame those benefits in the context of restoration later in the talk. So in 2020, in October 2020, we conducted a literature search on Web of Science and Scopus, using specific research terms that would be relevant and pull out the maximum possible number of relevant papers. This included conference proceedings. We also used Google Scholar to seek out reports and query literature. We sought suggestions from interviewed experts and our wider network for reports we may have missed and hard to access papers. And that resulted in 800 sources that we whittled down to 214 articles, book chapters, and reports that we cited in the final review. So this work has already been published as a report, freely available online, published by the organisation Mighty Earth, titled Rubber Agroforestry Feasibility at Scale. So everything I talk about here is contained in that report. I've skipped over some references and some detail for the sake of time, but everything that I talk about here is cited and clearly explained in quite a lot of detail in this report. So do have a look if you're interested in finding out more. The first thing we did was to come up with a typology for rubber agroforestry systems. So starting with wild harvested rubber from the Brazilian Amazon, for example, through to traditional jungle rubber systems in Indonesia, to then the planting of high-yielding clones, but in a sort of jungle rubber setting, with natural regrowth and a lot of secondary vegetation, but still using high-yielding rubber clones. Then on to intercropping systems. So permanent intercropping, so that's intercropping throughout the productive cycle of the trees, temporary and short-term intercropping, and also animal husbandry. And we give examples of all of these in a lot more detail in the main report. So our first findings were that we found substantial evidence that agroforestry can improve livelihoods. So whether integrating fruit trees, timber, small-scale livestock farming, we found multiple examples of how diversifying a rubber system to become an agroforest improved food security, contributed between 18 and 98% of income, provided additional cash crops. And we provide examples not only from Southeast Asia, but also from West Africa as well, where food security was particularly a pertinent issue. We also find that price premiums have been provided by some companies, some rubber buyers, including Einhorn, which is a condom company, linking directly to farmers who conduct agroforestry and providing them with a price premium, and then that translates into income and livelihood benefits. In terms of rubber yields, we find that latex yields are generally unaffected by intercropping. So rubber trees can actually grow better when there's intercropping than when they're grown in monocultures. And again, we find repeated examples from not only South Asia, but Southeast Asia, Brazil, and West Africa, where intercropping can actually benefit rubber tree growth. This may be through increasing humidity, although more work is needed to understand exactly why this happens. In terms of intercrop yields, we do know that the intercrops can yield less under the shade of the rubber tree than they can in the sun, but overall, per hectare of unit land area, you are getting an overall increased yield than with a monoculture of either the intercrop or the shaded rubber trees. We also find repeated examples of agroforestry improving social outcomes. I've already mentioned food security, but in Thailand, the social network around agroforestry was really important. We also found effects on gender roles and cultural preferences in different locations, for example, in Indonesia. And also that agroforestry can improve land tenure security for smallholder farmers compared to annual crops alone. So that's about incorporating rubber into annual crop systems and providing land tenure benefits. And that's an example from India. On to the restoration side, thinking about not restoration back to a natural forest, but restoration of some of the degrading processes that I talked about on that first slide around rubber monocultures, or even using rubber agroforestry as a transition to, in the long term, perhaps redeveloping a forest-like system, for example, if rubber prices do drop in the future and rubber is no longer an economically viable crop. So in terms of soil and water, we found that intercropping can provide multiple soil health benefits, including higher soil carbon and soil nutrients, increased water infiltration into soils through different root structures, and enhanced soil microbial biodiversity. And again, with examples from South Asia, Southeast Asia, Brazil, and West Africa. And increasingly, importantly, we find no evidence for competition between the rubber trees and the intercrops in most of the systems where this has been managed. For water or for nutrients. And in fact, we even found facilitation where root patterns of the rubber trees adapt to the intercrops and actually improve water use efficiency. So in our report, table 3, we actually summarize all of the different measured benefits for soils. There are a lot of studies to summarize with different kinds of intercrops, and you can find a lot of detail there on lots of different aspects of soil health. In terms of biodiversity and ecosystem functioning, I should state that avoiding deforestation is absolutely the first priority. No agroforestry system can provide the same biodiversity benefits or support the same species or the same ecosystem functioning as a natural forest. But we do find repeatedly that agroforestry is better than monocultures for biodiversity, whether that's an increase in the species richness of butterflies in a simple intercropping system in Thailand compared to monocultures. The species numbers there are very low in both cases, but there was an improvement. Or forest-dependent birds and plants being found in jungle rubber systems in Indonesia. So those benefits vary by system, but there is evidence even of large primate species such as orangutans and tamarins using fruit resources in rubber agroforests, albeit bringing with it wildlife-human conflicts, but there are benefits there. And also more work is needed on the role that rubber agroforestry can play in the landscape to improve habitat connectivity between remaining forest fragments. There is some evidence that needs more support, but there's definitely potential there for additional benefits that we haven't yet measured at the landscape level. Thinking then again about restoration of carbon sequestration and storage, again, avoiding deforestation is the first priority, but adding additional woody species and trees into a system increases above ground biomass, improves soil carbon, and there are also options for having longer plantation cycles and permanent cover methods in agroforestry systems relative to monocultures. And again, some of these techniques could be even used to restore degraded agricultural land, representing a huge carbon benefit relative to annual crops or repeated cyclical annual cropping that can lead to degradation. And again, we summarize carbon stocks in a very detailed table. So to conclude, we find that adoption of agroforestry practices can partially restore multiple aspects of soil, water and biodiversity, can improve incomes, food security and reduce risk, but the barriers to wider adoption must be tackled. Just to acknowledge the funders for this work, our universities, Mongo Bay for providing exposure on a recent interview that we conducted for them, and also to some reviewers and our editors at Mighty Earth who provided some stylistic inputs in putting together the report. Thank you.
Hi, and thanks to Manuel Toledo for the invitation to participate in the symposium. Share our findings about agroforestry systems and conservation. I look forward to hearing about your research and also discussing the topic. Agroforestry systems are systems set with agricultural plantation and trees that accompany them. These trees are planted by the farmer to produce timber and fruits, and also to shade the plantation and fix nitrogen. But these also have important ecological functions such as fixing nitrogen, preserving water, pest control, raising fertility, and also biodiversity conservation. I'll focus on this last function. Colombian tropical dry forest is in danger, and also tropical dry forest in the neotropics and around the world. In Colombia, only 9% of the original cover is still intact. What is interesting for us is that cocoa plantations overlap in a very nice manner with tropical dry forest. And we think there is an opportunity to preserve tropical dry forest elements and the function of this ecosystem within cocoa plantations. I'm going to talk about our research in the Upper Magdalena Valley. We sample a total of 8.1 hectares of cocoa agroforestry systems and 1 hectare of native forest. The diversity in our cocoa agroforestry systems is much lower than in native forest. However, it's still growing. So as we add and we search in another plantation, we'll find a new plant that is grown there. And I'll tell you one of the reasons I think this is happening. What are those plants? So 80% of the plants that grow within cocoa plantations are native to Colombia and the neotropics. And 30% of the plants occur locally in native forests. So there's a sizable amount of diversity, of local diversity, that is being preserved in cocoa agroforests. What are those plants used for by the farmer? These plants are planted because they're important for timber, food, and service, and some for medicine. But there are other plants that occur within plantation that most probably have not been planted because they have no declared use. Those are the ones that I think are unique, and we keep finding different ones in different plantations. Those are the ones that have been naturally dispersed and have not been removed by farmers because they don't see like there's any harm. Maybe they find them good for shade and they're kept in the plantation, but they don't have any specific use declared by the farmers. What are the ecological benefits of the plants associated with these plantations? They produce fruit for the fauna, for birds and mammals, and they are also important for restoration of ecosystems. I would like to highlight the species that have not declared use. Those are diverse set of species from a diverse families that are dispersed naturally to the region. And I also like to highlight some of the species that are important for restoration. Many of them are used by farmers for nitrogen fixation or for shade, but are also very important, are local species, very important for restoration processes and projects. Another aspect that we evaluated was the influence of plant diversity on cocoa yield. We evaluated cocoa yield in 15 farms. And what we found is that there is no influence of plant diversity on cocoa yield. There's no negative, no positive influence. This is good news because we can promote the enrichment of cocoa agroforestry systems with native species because higher plant diversity is not going to affect the cocoa yield. This has been also shown in other parts of the world. So this finding is encouraging for our purpose of using cocoa agroforestry systems for preserving plant diversity. What are our take-home messages? Well, cocoa agroforestry systems have less diversity than natural forests. This is what we have expected because of the literature and because of ecology. These plants planted by farmers are important for their economic benefit, not only directly because they produce fruit and timber, but also because they help control pests and conserve water. And lastly, these plants are important for the fauna. Our proposal is to promote the enrichment of agroforestry systems with native plants that will not only help our purpose of preserving the species in this ecosystem, but also most probably will be also useful for the farmers. These agroforestry systems can also be useful for connecting remnants of forests, forming corridors for the fauna elements, for animals, for birds and mammals. And we also think that there are excellent elements for the restoration programs that have been highlighted in the decade of restoration declared by the UN that goes from 2020 to 2030. I would like to thank all of you for your attention and also the people that have been involved in this project.
Right. So welcome everybody again to the questions and answers. I think we have been very efficient in answering many of the questions while we were discussing. So, but let's just start with one interesting question as a starting point that was already answered partially by Alejandra Jaramillo. This question is from Luke Powell. And he's saying agroforestry implies a land sharing approach. But recent reviews and meta-analysis in top journals have been touting land sparing as more effective at conserving biodiversity at the landscape level. Given these results, can you speak to the role of agroforestries as a feasible alternative or complement to sparing-based approaches employing high yield, often full sun agriculture over smaller areas? He also says, thanks for the organization of this symposium. This is an open question if anybody would like to add something.
Maybe I could make a small contribution. I think it's a very, very interesting question, Luke. Thank you. And I think in my talk, I mentioned a little bit about this because I don't think that cacao, at least cacao or other agroforestry systems are so exclusive to land sharing or sparing. In our case, in the dry forests, I find that cacao is actually a good method, like a good tool to transition to a more land sparing approach, because what we find is that definitely we need the forest. There are species that cannot be in the agroforests at all. So protecting those forests is still super necessary. But what I showed in the presentation is that this fine and flavored cacao gives the economic security so that farmers can actually invest in restoration and maintain the forest and improve the conditions in the forest in that way. In the case that we have in Piura, private chocolate companies are funding restoration initiatives. And in that way, the farmers are creating their own greenhouses to have seedlings of native dry forest species and also try to use them as shade trees in the cacao agroforests, which is not that common in our study area. Normally the shade trees are introduced, fruit trees is not the same kind of system that you have in Africa. So I would say that that is not that exclusive, and definitely it offers options for land sparing.
Thank you very much, Carolina.
Yeah, maybe I can add something to that question. Thanks, Luke. That's actually a very exciting question. I think it's largely a question also about time. So there are lots of studies that have been advocated by Ben Fallon, I think, that come out of Africa, where it has been shown, you have these species with small ranges, and then if you pursue a land sparing approach, then basically population sizes of these small range species might increase. But then the advocates of land sharing would probably say that that's kind of a short-term effect that we are seeing. When we look at more at the long term, in fact, you see that these populations in the spared areas are declining. So on the longer term, and I do think that agroforestry systems and agroforestry as a strategy is not necessarily this kind of short-term approach. If we take in a long-term approach, land sharing overall is probably a more suitable strategy. When you look at agroforestry overall, it will take time before you manifest all the benefits, and I think we're all aware that this conversion from monocultures back to agroforestry systems for restoration purposes or whatever will come with a yield decline. And so, for these kind of are all long-term effects, and these long-term effects need to be much better understood. But I think that's also quite important to consider when we talk about the land sharing, land sparing debate here.
Thank you very much, Tom. We can just move a little bit to some other questions. There's also one question here from Jazz to Tom. The question is, I'm quite intrigued by this research you are presenting. One question is, why exactly rubber, cocoa, and coffee versus all other possible crops?
Yeah, I answered the question in the chat a little bit. I think what all these three crops have in common is that they are produced primarily by smallholders. They're primarily produced in biodiverse tropical areas. They have all been attributed to large-scale deforestation and land use change. And now there is an urgent need across multiple stakeholders to actually make a change, to integrate, facilitate these kind of discussions where we need to come to a solution, which I guess we all agree is agroforestry systems, to basically deliver livelihood benefits, to deliver these biodiversity benefits and ecosystem service benefits. And I think that also, this complexity of these systems make them quite exciting. Why we're focusing specifically on these three crops, I think, is also driven by experience. So we have all worked on these crops. We've worked on cocoa, coffee, and Ellie has worked for quite a while on rubber as well. So we're all passionate about these crops, and I think passion is very important. If you want to move the needle in this type of research, you really have to be passionate about it. So we focus on these three crops because there's quite a bit of room to change something. We're passionate about it, but it's not exclusive on these three crops. So if there's anyone interested in different agroforestry systems and has good ideas to contribute to the global agroforestry network, there's definitely room to broaden the scope.
Yeah, indeed, that's a quite important question regarding other types of agroforestry systems that they may play an important role for food security, for instance. Here there is a question to Alejandra. I see that it says it's from David Lee. He's asking, what specific criteria, if any, will you use to select the plant species for additional planting in cacao agroforestry systems? Many thanks.
Well, Manuel, I think I answered that, and I'll reply to the global that might have not seen the answer. So the trees that are, you cannot have trees that compete with the canopy of cocoa, because it's like when you have oranges, of course, the farmer can get oranges, but you're going to have a lot lower cocoa production. So it would have to be trees that are higher up in the canopy, and that can be good source of fruit for the mammals and birds and other vertebrates, especially, that we would like to use these farms as corridors for ecological connectivity. So, and if you have big trees, you also have good carbon stock. So big trees would be a good thing.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. I see here another question from Johannes bin Jamaluddin. Is writing, dear panelists, thank you very much for the insightful presentations. My name is Johannes from the National University of Singapore, and I would like to direct the questions to Eleanor. So I think maybe Tom could help answering the questions. Given that rubber agroforestry, thank you. Given that agroforestry systems in rubber are better for the environment than rubber monocultures, do you think it is possible for a large-scale adoption of rubber agroforestry to meet rising demands? As you mentioned, rubber production yields have saturated, and thus there is threat for rubber driving deforestation. My understanding is that rubber agroforestry systems are limited in their ability for high production volumes that monocultures are capable of. How do we revamp the agricultural paradigm to adopt agroforestry systems instead of monoculture plantations?
Okay, since Ellie is not here, I take that question. So thanks, Johannes, for that question. And I will answer that very shortly since we don't have much time left. In fact, if you look at the literature, and that's quite different to cocoa and coffee agroforestry systems, you do not see a change in rubber yields. if you have, if you think of, for instance, permanent intercropping agroforestry systems. And that is only if you maintain the densities of planting rubber trees in monocultures and also agroforestry systems. So I think the yield per se, the yield gap between monocultures and agroforestry systems in rubber is not a big implementation problem. The problem is more that a knowledge gap is a problem. People are not really aware of agroforestry systems, what it is, how to implement it. And I think there needs to be a good strategy forward for especially large estate plantation owners to trial out what agroforestry can bring in terms of benefits for the smallholder farmers that oftentimes work on these estates. And what it can also bring in terms of climate resilience. So there's a lot of communication work to do, but just to reiterate, there's not really a yield difference between monocultures and agroforestry systems in rubber.
Thank you very much, Tom, for the answer. Now I see that we have no more time for questions, but I encourage everybody to keep this discussion, which is very exciting in other platforms, in WOA, for instance. And thank you very much. I would like to thank the panelists for these excellent talks, and the audience, as well as the ATBC for organizing this conference. And thank you very much, and see you around.